This is the second video in a two-part series on modifying the HG Kshatriya. If you haven't already, please watch Part A first. The shoulder of the Kshatriya has an unfortunate seam line running down the side. The best way to deal with this is by using thin cement. We'll be using the same technique that we used on the waist, and always remember to allow the part to cure entirely before sanding it smooth. The 2 points at the end of the forearm cover are rounded over. We're going to use this coarse file to reshape them into points. Simply follow the curve of the part, and this should only take 1 to 2 passes with the coarse file. Make sure you follow that up with some sandpaper until the finish is smooth and even. We're now going to modify the upper and lower elements of the arms to both fuse the seam lines and to keep the inner and outer elements of the arms separate. We'll start with the forearm. We need to remove all 4 pegs at the front of the part, and there's one last peg at the back that I didn't notice at first. At this point, we should be able to insert the inner frame into the forearm armor. We will perform a similar modification on the bicep armor. We need to remove the pegs and proud elements from around the central trunk of the inner frame. We also need to remove material from the interior of the bicep armor to accommodate this. The second part of the arm modification will be to fuse the seam lines of both the upper and lower parts of the arm armor. We're going to use thin cement to fuse these seam lines. The upper part of the arm is more difficult because there are no pegs to hold the sides together. You basically need to align and hold the parts together until the glue starts to affect the plastic. The Kshatriya only comes with a single pair of hands. Replacing the hands is an easy way to create a more impressive pose and to up the detail. There's one problem. The ball joints of these spare hands are too small for this kit. To fix this, we're going to need to enlarge the ball joints by applying a slurry of baby powder and superglue onto the ball. Mix just enough powder into the glue until it forms a sort of paste, and then apply it evenly over the surface of the ball. Allow this mixture to cure for several hours before testing and adjusting the fit to size. Like the megaparticle cannons on the chest, we're going to plug some photo etch parts into these recesses on the feet to add detail. I found the 3.5mm size to be the perfect fit for these recesses. Apply a pinch of superglue to keep everything down. I will be using a 0.15mm BMC chisel throughout this process. I find that the 0.15 panel line is the perfect size for most 1/144th scale kits. A 0.2mm scriber can also be mixed in to add some variety to your panel line width. Like the other areas done so far, I'll be tracing any area where 2 planes of the plastic intersect. I'll be performing scribing all over these legs using this technique. There's a lot to do here, but I find it to be super relaxing once I get into it. Remember, light pressure and multiple passes are key. You should be able to catch your fingernail in the groove once you've done scribing to a section. There is a small depression on the back of the armor just below the knee. Using a drill bit, I bored out the depression on this piece to be slightly larger than it was before, and then I applied thin cement and added a small dome part. And like the other areas of the leg, I traced a few panel lines into this piece. Following the same technique used elsewhere on this kit, we will be fusing the lower leg parts. There are a number of different elevations present on this part, so you'll need to apply glue in several different areas to ensure that you have full coverage. Allow this glue to cure for at least a few hours before sanding it smooth. There are two large blank recessed areas at the base of the front of the legs. Instead of leaving these elements blank, I've added texture plastic plate into these gaps. These recessed areas are a slightly complex shape, so I created a template by applying and cutting masking tape to size. It's important to push the tape into all the corners so that we get a template that's close to the shape of the recess. Once we have our template, we can affix it to the plastic plate sheet and cut it into shape. When applying the template into the corrugated plate, it's important to keep the corrugations parallel to the top and the bottom of the recess. Once you're ready to cut the material, make several light passes until you're through. Here I'm using more of a rocking motion, which works similarly, but I noticed that the cut was rougher. Depending on your template and the cuts, some sanding may be required to get this part to fit in perfectly. Once you're satisfied with the shape of your part, glue it into place. There's one round blank detail on each side of the leg. We're going to add a round Kotobukiya detail element to each side. Like the other parts that we've added, you'll need to cut and sand these parts before gluing them into place. These parts are directional thanks to the slash mark through the center, so make sure that you have the orientation in the right direction. I think they'd look wonky otherwise. We're now going to move on to one of the other major modifications to the proportions of this model. My goal here is to widen each of the thighs. To start, I removed the recessed element in the center of the thigh by slowly cutting through it using my scriber. Alternatively, a hobby knife can be used for this purpose. Make several light passes instead of trying to hack off the material in one fell swoop. And I realize it's counterintuitive to remove the material to widen something, but I did this because it's easier to add material to the flat recessed area instead of having to deal with the complex and odd shape. Once the material is removed, we can begin adding the plot plate. Full disclosure on this next part, originally I had planned on creating some detail with the plot plate by leaving gaps and creating some other details. But after I was finished with the second part, I decided I didn't like the finished effect. So off screen I added putty and just kind of smoothed everything out. Like the previous steps, I used a toothpick to apply small amounts of superglue along the green armor before applying the plastic plate. I'm not cutting these pieces to size before gluing them. I find that it's just easier to cut the parts after the glue has been cured. My process is fairly basic by simply gluing layers of the plate into place. Thin cement can also be used to melt the plastic plates into place. Treat these parts delicately until they're cured. They can pop off very easily otherwise. And just one more reminder, I puttied these parts smooth after the fact, and I forgot to record that work. Sorry. Like the other areas I've already sharpened, I will sharpen the blunt tips of each of these binders. The same technique we've used before still applies. Start with your coarse file to reshape the part, and then clean them up with finer grits of sandpaper. There are 4 recesses present on each binder that could use some additional detail. I opted to use a tiny set of round parts to improve the overall appearance. This is done rather simply by cutting out the components and then gluing them into place. These parts are only about 1 millimeter in diameter, so be careful when handling them. If you drop one off your table, you'll probably never find it. The interior of the thruster bells is hollow and bland. I have added another set of Kotobukiya round molds to spice up the detail. I recommend that you pull the ball joint out of the back of the thruster before gluing the new mold into place. Sanding down the ball joint may also be required to prevent it from pushing the round mold out of place. Similar to the other parts, the megaparticle cannons on the binders are lacking in detail. I have added a round mold detail to each cannon to spice things up. To get the round mold to sit cleanly within the cannon, it must be first widened using a flat bit. Once the recess has been prepared, simply glue the detail piece into place. The final modification that I have for this project is to apply a photo-etched element into the recess of each binder support arm. Just like before, apply a tiny amount of superglue to secure the part into place. Hey guys and gals, sorry if this video took a little bit longer to get out. I know I originally thought I'd have this piece out by April, but the length of the video, my general frustration with editing, and some missing footage ensured that it wasn't going to happen in time. In the next video I will be covering the painting process on the Kshatriya, so stay tuned, and as always, thanks for watching.